I am glad to be here with you. But what I want to do today is start to frame why we are having this conversation in a slightly different way. President Alexander laid it out exactly right. The work that has to be done, the history that we've had, what's actually at risk. What I want to do is tell you a little bit of story, because we all come to this work through our own experiences that I did before I even joined the administration. Just before I joined the administration, I was with the Gates Foundation, and I was working in Washington, D.C., and D.C. decided that it wanted to run a program called Double the Numbers, to double the numbers of students that were coming out of D.C. schools that graduated from college. And in the context of doing that, you did the kind of analysis to say, so, what's happening to our kids in K-12? What's happening as they proceed to go towards college? What colleges are they going to, and where are they graduating from? One of the analysis that we did there was, okay, where are the kids going to college and where are they graduating from? And one of the things that was important in that was to actually segment it, and segment it into 5 different categories based on selectivity, which also had a high correlation with income, as you might guess. Something struck us. When you looked at the category open admissions, you had a range of colleges that had graduation rates ranging from 11% to 59%. Now this means for kids who could have gone to any one of those institutions, they had the opportunity to choose anywhere from having a 1 in 10 chance of getting out to at least a 6 in 10 chance of getting out. We all know that exists. The interesting thing about it is none of the counselors, none of the parents, none of the principals, before that analysis was done, was using that information to help make their choices about where those students would go to school. Students were, even with the best advice that people were giving them, making decisions based on a lot of other factors, other than one that I think that many of us would think is one of the most important things that you could consider. What are my odds of actually getting out? So this is something that feels like common sense, but the reality is that the president has taken it one step further. As President Alexander said, this is not only important for individual communities, but for every individual, college is the best investment that they're going to make. Some kind of post-secondary education that lets them have an opportunity to get into family wage work and a career where when industries change, when jobs change, they have the opportunity to keep moving forward. We know this is not only important for the individual, but our competitiveness as a nation depends on having people who can compete, not anymore with the people around them, but with people around the world. And yet recognizing how important this is, what we've allowed ourselves to do is to have a system that has become extraordinarily expensive, growing at rates, the cost of which has grown at rates far outstripping family incomes in our country. And yet the outcomes have not kept up with that increase in income and expense. That is the very basic problem that we have to solve. We have to get about the business of getting many more people to graduate and graduate ready for the best opportunities in life, and to make it much more affordable for them to do so. Because not only can they not afford it, we can't afford it. We can't afford it in terms of the $1 trillion in debt that you heard. We can't afford it in terms of the increases in aid that are pouring into systems, especially at the federal level as states start to pull back on the funding that they're providing to higher education. We need to make it transparent for people what it is not only that they're paying, but why they're paying it and what they're paying it for. They need to understand that when the tuition goes up at a college, it may not be just because the people at the college wanted to raise the tuition, but that those components of what makes up the aid that they normally would have gotten have faded away. So we're focused on creating a system, and the president has called us to create a system that will allow us to not only invest in the individuals, but to allow them to take those dollars in disproportionate ways to institutions that are going to serve them well and that serve the public good well, that serve the public interest of access, that recognize the importance of affordability, and ultimately, of course, that produce great student outcomes. That is the work that we're setting about. But we know that this framework is something that we can't enter into lightly. done clumsily or carelessly or without proper thought, we could create unintended consequences, unintended incentives. So that is why we are here to listen to you, to understand exactly how we create a systems of ratings that actually takes into consideration all of the things that were important. That not only takes into consideration whether or not students got out, but which students got out, how many students got out. Did you take care of the students who were least likely to be successful, who needed the most support and resources? What incentives can we create to get people in the business of taking those folks who have not historically been well in the business of doing that extraordinarily well? Because what we know as a country is we can't hit that aspiration, we can't get back to number one unless we get different people than we've ever gotten to graduate from school before to graduate. It's just that simple. So I don't want to talk to you much more because I'd love to hear much more from you. But I thought I cut this thing off. We have been out across the country, in Chicago, in Boulder, Colorado, in DC. We'll hear in person, we'll hear online. What is important is for us to not only hear from you, but for you to be clear about how we get to our common objective. Propelling this country back to number one. Some people think that objective is not something that speaks to the core of the morality of why you would actually do this work. There is an individual moral purpose about giving opportunity to individual people. But I actually want us to tie those two things together. We cannot sustain the American promise, especially for those who have historically not benefited from it, if we don't solve this problem. This is an economic problem, it's a competitiveness problem, but it is also a social justice problem. So I'm happy to hear from you today. We are looking forward to listening to it. You're going to have a series of folks. There are folks who are not up here with us who are also here listening as well. It will go back into the system, and Jamie Studley will talk to you about exactly how we're going to pull all this together. And we'll fit into a broader framework of the work that the administration hopes to do, building on things like Know Before You Owe and the other things that we started to put together, but that will drive the incentives of this billions and billions of dollar industry, if you want to call it that, so that we do right by students, we do right by families, and we do right by our communities and country.